We have breaking news out of Cuba, where the president there just announced that while he's open to peace talks with the United States, his government also is not ruling out the possibility of entering a, quote, state of war.
This comes as the country suffers weeks of widespread power outages and fuel shortages after a tense feud with the U.S. over oil trade and Venezuela. The United Nations even warning of a humanitarian crisis there. NBC News correspondent George Solis following the very latest for us from our Miami bureau. So, George, what else did we hear from Cuba's president during this press conference? And remind us where things currently stand between the two countries.
Yeah, good afternoon, both of you. The press conference wrapping up a little bit after 2 hours, where the president addressed a wide range of topics specifically related to the country's energy grid, their power, and, of course, some of the strained relationship between the U.S. and Cuba as it stands. I want to read you some of the key takeaways from his, what we could easily call a marathon press conference here, addressing this wide range of topics, saying there's a long line of issues that can be addressed between Cuba and the U.S., and that Cuba is willing to engage in a dialogue with the U.S. on any issue. But here's the caveat: without pressure, without preconditions, on equal footing, and with respect for sovereignty, without interference in internal affairs, and that this is a civilized, in his words, bilateral coexistence that can be built. And on that subject about war, it's very clear on what he said. He says that the country is preparing to enter a state of war, not that it has already entered a state of war, and that people are participating in the preparation, saying that it is immoral for the U.S. to accuse Cuba of terrorism when it has suffered terror from the U.S., relating to the fact that the country was put on the state-sponsored list of terrorism by the Trump administration. And just some more interesting developments that sort of came in tandem with this press conference, guys. You also just had Florida Congressman Carlos Jimenez here out of South Florida sending a letter to American Airlines and other U.S. carriers urging them to cancel all flights to Cuba, citing President Trump's executive order declaring a national emergency due to Cuban dictatorship posing, as he says, quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat, guys.
And, George, just to sort of contribute to some of the context you're offering, Miguel Díaz-Canel, the president there we just saw of Cuba, he has historically always been defiant in his position about protecting the country against the United States' interests. But NBC Nightly news anchor Tom Llamas spoke to President Trump about the current state of relations. What did he have to say about Cuba?
Yeah, excellent point there, Morgan. And we're going to hear more from President Trump in that exclusive that he had with President Donald Trump. And he did touch on some very key things here that's very interesting. You heard from President Trump saying that they are talking, they're in talks with the Cuban government, saying, you know what, we have tens of thousands of people that were forced out of there. They voted for me, 94% Cuban population, just sort of kind of going along those lines. But the takeaway here is that President Trump telling Tom Llamas that they are in talks with the Cuban government at this time. But how those relationships unfold from here on out obviously remains to be seen, guys.
And a lot of members of the Cuban community feel like this is the time to have those talks following what happened in Venezuela. George Solis for us there in Miami. Thanks.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.